And I want to talk a little bit about, in advance of our discussion, talk a little bit about experiences as a lay leader. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about myself. First, personal. I am a graduate of the Technion in electrical engineering, have an MBA from the University of Phoenix in one of the very, very first online courses, which I was asked to take just, to test the system back in 1991, 1992, when most people didn't know what the web was. And then beyond that, I married. It will be 36 years. We have 6 kids. 2 of them are roaming around here as well. I think that is enough of background. Let's go and continue. So some personal stuff. I started with that. I was an officer at the Israel Air Force as an engineer. Have an extensive background in semiconductors. That was most of my career. Dealt with some big companies in the semiconductor industry, and then dealt with various startup companies. Some of them that I joined just as an employee, like Nogatech. Others that I have helped fund, like Agam Innovations, BAM Medical, and InSounds. All kinds of companies like that. Now I have a company called Initiatives IP, and that specializes in assisting startup companies in their pursuit of intellectual property protection. And I will not go into that in very, very much detail, but that is what I do for my regular life. In my life as in the startup world, I've gone over 44 or 45 different exits. And an exit means that the company was bought by another company or it went IPO. And because we get some equity for our work, we've done, my firm has done pretty well. And I have over 2 dozens of patents in my name as co-inventor. But this is not enough, so I also did some lay leadership stuff as well, and that included being the lay cantor of the Netanya congregation, and that is like one of those funny stories. I'm going to begin my 50th year of volunteering as lay cantor, which is funny because I'm only 63, so it means I'm going to be 63, I'm not even yet. So when I was 13 and we founded the congregation in Netanya, 2 months into the business, we lost our cantor. And everybody was, okay, what do we do without a cantor? And being 13, what's the big deal? Anybody can be a cantor, I'll do it. You get stuck with jobs like that for a lifetime, what can I tell you? And then I've been doing that now all the time. I was chair of the Technion students body, probably the youngest one ever. I was 21 when I was, and usually, in Israel they start, of course, studying much later. I was in the academic reserves, so I first studied. So I was one of the youngest, I think the youngest to ever do that. It was very interesting because we took the Technion student body that was a losing proposition, made it a profitable organization that worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 363 days, because Yom Kippur we did nothing. But other than that, it worked all the time. I'm a board member and now the chair of the Israel Movement for Reform and Progressive Judaism. I volunteer at another NGO called Unistream, and that specializes in assisting or preparing youngsters into their entrepreneurship studies, and that goes, it's a post school hours study. They go from 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock in the evening, all the way from Eilat to Tzfat, and I've been crisscrossing the country giving lectures about these things. But the idea is to take kids who are not in Tel Aviv and who really have access to all of this, and to get them into the process of entrepreneurship. A very interesting, and by the way, it includes also Bedouin, Arabs, and it's a very inclusive program, very interesting. And I support Reut, which is a hospital, a rehabilitation hospital, a private hospital operating in Tel Aviv. Now, recently it was on the news. I don't know if you noticed the songwriter Tzvika Pik, who had some kind of a condition probably, and he was hospitalized in that hospital. And I'm a member of the Jewish Funders Network, and if you don't know what it is, go and look it up. It's also an interesting thing. So, I have a lot of time under my hands. Actually, when we spoke about it, Izzy and myself, about how to start this program, one of the things is that, you know how many times we get, this is not how things are done here. Kind of things, you know, things were like this before, this is how they are going to stay. So, 125 years ago, in 2 weeks, on 14th of June, 1893, my great-grandparents got married in Hamburg, Germany. This, at home I have the original on my desk waiting because I thought that I'm going to come with all this stuff with me to show up rather than a presentation. I had all of that ready, but forgot it. And but luckily I have a scanned version here. So, and this is the menu from their wedding, 125 years ago. Now, it's very easy to see, you know, if you read Gothic German, that you got a soup at the beginning, and you had coffee at the end. There was goose, like, you know, a young goose was served there. There was a ragu, and, you know, all kinds of the foods that we got basically yesterday. Okay? So things don't change. They really don't change. You know, you find this stuff as well. Maybe more interesting, there's also the music that goes on here. It's the menu of the music. And you'll notice there are two pieces by Wagner. How come in a Jewish wedding, Wagner? Who dare? But remember, this is 1893. Nobody knew anything about Wagner being a Nazi. Okay, he was already dead 40 years at that point in time. So all that shtick is a different issue. We don't talk about it. In that respect, one kind of loses the track of history. It's kind of condensed. But if you look at it from this perspective, music, even classical music, was played in weddings. And for those who know a little bit about Israel, in the respect of music, there's this music that they call musikat chatunot. Music that goes for weddings, played in weddings, and it's usually considered like low-level music. Okay, so Wagner, Mozart, Strauss, another low levels we know. Okay, so it's an interesting debate that I'm going to start one day in Israel on that one as well. The idea is solving problems. Many times, as leaders and as technical leaders, we need to solve problems. This problem I solved with a friend of mine who was trained to be a lawyer, but when they need to go through a training period, and one of the things when they get the training period, they don't get paid well. So he also tendered as a bartender. At the end of the day, they put in pourers like that they stick them into the bottles, and I'm sure you saw them here as well. But at the end of the day, what do? You either have to find the cork and close all the hundreds of bottles that are in the bar, or you kind of use plastic wrappers to shut them off, to seal them, because you don't want all kinds of insects coming in. And sometimes we forget to do that when we do leadership stuff. We forget that we can solve things very simply and get a huge reward. So we go to very complex things. We try and find complex ways of solving stuff and forget that sometimes simple is actually quite good. This is another way of helping people. And I think that is part of our job as leaders, is to help people. I don't know how many of you have heard about something called tongue tie. Tongues get tied. They have like that, what's called frenulum? That kind of thing that connects the tongue to whatever it is in English. What do you call it? The bottom part of the mouth, whatever. And they do surgery on that. The problem is after surgery, it gets reattached. And once it's reattached, it's very difficult to detach again. The advice of doctors is usually they tell the parents, just stick in your finger and under the tongue of the infant and do this. Most parents don't. They prefer coming back to the doctor and telling me, we have a problem, you didn't do the surgery well. So a doctor came to us with some kind of a solution. We looked at his solution and said, this is a good solution for doctors, but it's not a good solution for parents. And therefore, let's think about how to do that. And we came with this idea that's called Americans call it a LIPR. It is now being sold actually all over the world as a tool to exercise the tongue after surgery or before surgery. And sometimes you cannot, and again, it's a stupid little plastic thing. These cost to manufacture about 50 cents, but they go from when you sell them, it's about $10 a piece. So, they are very interesting things. But this is my interesting project. July of 1994, a very good friend of mine, Yuval Shachar, sends me an email saying, Reuven, how about having a telephone where you could surf, it will have a touch screen and you could surf the web. Now put yourself back in 1994, I'm sure most of you would not have understood this entire sentence, would not have known what email meant, would not have known what the web is, what the touch screen is. Maybe, you touch a window glass, but it's not something that is usually done. So here, something disappeared from this presentation. Okay. But we came up with this idea, and I told Yuval, maybe the best thing for us to do is leave National Semiconductor and do it just ourselves as a startup, but he unfortunately wrote about it to everybody in the firm, so we were stuck doing it at National Semiconductor. And they had actually a very good program called 100-100, and it just shows, how sometimes one has to think innovatively, even in big companies. 100-100 was, you got $100,000 for 100 days to prove a concept. You were released of anything else you needed to do, just to do that project, and we did that. The interesting thing is that when we presented it for the first time, they said, well, it's a very nice project, but nobody is going to use the internet as much as you predicted. They were right in a sense, we were wrong, but the other direction. But it just shows how much even technical people know about what the future entails. But we needed a name. And the name that we came up with was iPhone. It's really our name, Yuval Shachar and myself, who came up with this name. And the reason is that National Semiconductor had all kinds of something names in products. iPower was another one of those things. It had nothing to do with internet, or that was not the thinking at the time. At the time, mostly people used E at the beginning, like in my initiatives. Okay, so it is. This was a very new form, and it's interesting to see. You'll find it on YouTube. In 2007, when the Apple iPhone was introduced, and you hear the speech of Steve Jobs, you'd think that he invented it all from the beginning. Now you'd say, how come that he used the same iPhone name and this very much the same concepts? Look at the bottom. For you, it's on the left-hand side. At the screen that we have envisioned. This is an iPhone screen. He saw that, Steve Jobs. The reason he saw that the CEO of National Semiconductor, Gil Amelio, was later the CEO of Apple. And he took that idea with him to Apple. By the way, it wasn't stealing. And we had it in our business plan to have Apple manufacture something like that because we wanted them to buy semiconductor components. National Semiconductor didn't do products like that. But when you are in Israel and you want to see one of the original iPhones from 1995, come by my office. I'll show you one. You have seen it. So, another it can't be done moment that I had was back in 2000 and I think it was 15. I woke up one day and I said, we need to take Debbie Friedman's music and make an arrangement, a classical arrangement of that music. And I can tell you that I got that it can't be done so many times from so many people. One can get very frustrated, but usually I get motivated when people tell me it can't be done. It can't be done means that they don't know how to do it, but I know. It just took a few months. We had it, the original stuff done, still, on computers and so on, and presented it eventually in our 2016 biennial. It was played for the first time, 3 of the 5 movements. Then at biennial at Boston, it was played the full as part of the World Union IHED event. It was played in Holland now twice, and in Porto Alegre, Brazil, just last week in the opening of their new concert hall. Just shows you can dream and you can do things. Don't get frustrated from it can't be done. I'm sorry we don't have enough youngsters here. That was probably my message to young adults because it's so frustrating. They get people like myself, with a lot of experience. And sometimes we know just from experience that this is not the best way to do it. And we automatically say, well, this cannot be done. Instead of giving them the opportunity to go and do it. Maybe fail, maybe they'll show us a new way of doing it that we didn't think of. But even failing, so what? So they learn something. It's not a big deal. We need people who know how to fail. We need people who know how to manage failure. So it's that is very important. So I think these are things that are doable. And it's all about innovation. I always take this from The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry. It is only with the heart that one can see right. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Many times we forget that. We think that if we see, we understand. But it's a deception. This is not the truth. Many times it's what we feel. It's that gut feel that says, yeah, this is the right thing to do. Go for it. Worst case, one fails. So innovation in leadership. Challenging ourselves. Make sure that we don't have a day that we've not challenged ourselves with something new. We need to address those challenges because many times we put the challenges and we say, well, somebody needs to do something. Somebody needs to do something is uninteresting. What is interesting is what we say we are going to do, and we are going to change the world. We need to have teamwork and creative teamwork. Not to be afraid. It's not all about us. It's about us in the plural rather than us in the individual. Then we can be very, very successful. We must remember to spend time listening. This is a good marketing skill. It's a good sales skill, and it's always a good leadership skill. Listen. When you think you are listening enough, you are probably still listening too little. So it's very, very important to make sure that it happens. Go for the strategic planning. People many times skip that. It doesn't matter if later on you switch the strategy. I read once a very good book called Upside Down Marketing, and they said it's always you have to develop a strategy, but look for successes and go with the successes despite of the strategy. Because many times we have very good strategies and we get kind of all the time going for the strategy, but forget that we need to look for successes. Sometimes the strategy is good, but nobody's interested. So you want to go with what works. Stick with good plans. Don't jump all the time from one place to another. We always see that, with new boards, they tend to come, well, we need a new chair. The new chair needs to come up with a new plan. No, take the plan from the other one. Go continue with that. If it's a good plan, make it happen. Never stop learning. People many times forget to continue to learn. They are sure that they have learned everything, but there's not a day that passes that you cannot learn something new. Make sure that that happens all the time. You need to believe that you can change the world. This is something that we have 100% control over. Sometimes it's frustrating. Danny, when he spoke here before, talked of the challenges that we have in Israel. But in my mind, it's not only challenges, it actually shows that we are very, very successful. We are on the map. People are addressing reform issues, liberal issues, whatever you like to call them, but they are addressing us. They are fighting us. They know that we are winning. They see the outcome that is going to be evident to most people 10 and 20 and 30 years from now. So that is... and the last thing is make dreams come true. Don't forget to do that. Dream and make them come true. It can be done. Okay. It was a little too long, wasn't it? I apologize.
I don't know if this microphone's on. Is that working? Okay. Okay, so Charlie has asked me to come and talk to Reuven a little bit about his leadership style and skills and experience and what we can learn from that, but also kind of as lay leaders, what that means and what we can learn from each other. So we had a brief discussion last night about all these various topics and innovations, and also thinking about kind of how our experiences match. So just a little bit of background for those who don't know me. So I am a part of the team at Liberal Judaism. I do marketing and communications, so website, all that fun stuff. And I also am one of the trustees for Limud and have been involved with Limud in the UK and in Canada for the last 8 years or so. And then various other bits of volunteering and things like that with youth movements and stuff like that. So I think we were talking about lots of things that I think we come to the same perspective from, but a different perspective, but to the same goal and to the same outcome. And I just wanted to pick up on the thing that we both bonded over the most, I think, which was the idea of thinking outside the box and not having to do things the way they've always been, but also that phrase of that's not how we do things here either. So not only this is how we do it, but also we don't want to bring in new ideas because that's not how we do it. So I think I wanted to ask you, in your experience, especially in Israel and with progressive Judaism and kind of making that name, how do you change that perspective and how have you found that to work best for you?
First of all, it's always a challenge. These things are challenging, and one of the things that we do a lot is have very good professionals in place and I hope a good board that can work together very well with the professionals in a way that, and again, I'm speaking from my perspective, Anna maybe want to add from her professional perspective. The idea is, because as lay leaders, you need to also give enough space to the professionals to go and do what they dream, not only what I dream, okay? Because sometimes it's a tendency, well, I dream that, and you need to do what I say. And one has to differentiate between the things that, the big picture that you want to direct the organization to, and those things that you want people to be able to have their vision and be impactful, also as professional leaders, and that is, Anna serves as our chief operating officer, so she's reports to Gilad at a very high level. But the idea is to have it also pushed down to the very low levels of the organization, so that they too can feel that they can do and change things and get involved and get it done. Of course, here we have also another challenge, is getting through all the congregations. How do you get them involved? How do you keep that spirit going on?
So I think one of the things that I wanted to pick up on is that relationship and that balance between the professionals and the lay leaders. And as someone who's been on both sides of that in various capacities, I think there's an interesting sense that the professionals know what they're doing and the lay leaders just have opinions. They don't necessarily have the skills, they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And people, as much as they have that professional skill outside of their lay leadership, it's very easy to get put in that lay leadership position and everyone assumes that you don't know really what's happening, you don't have those skills. Like, how do you think, I think taking from that professional leadership experience and management experience, how can we learn from that world of bringing people in and using their knowledge and their skills best without having, and to make that relationship between professionals and lay leaders the best it can be in the most efficient way possible?
One is we try to identify good people all the time, try to bring them in, try to look at their skill set. Israel has changed dramatically in that respect. I always joke about my board that we used to have, it was mostly, if it was somebody coming out from abroad and speaking English, there was not an issue. We had the meeting in English, and who cared? I mean, everybody was fluent in English, not a big deal. Today I have complaints from several people on my board. When we have Carol or Danny, and they come and speak in English, they complain. We don't necessarily understand. We need some translation of what they say, because they're not necessarily fluent in English at that level that will allow them to follow a full meeting. Mm-hmm. So you have that. But I think what you have also is that what has changed the picture is that these are now people who mostly went to the Israeli military service. Some of them are high-ranked officer. You take Yaron Shavit, my predecessor, is colonel. Yair Lutzstein is a colonel, and so we are speaking of people who are high-level people, and it's not only people coming from academia or rabbinical background. We now have a board that has business people, a very, very strong board, and we have done some changes that I think are going to impact the Israeli reform movement significantly. Just to give an idea, in my 5 years, or 4 years now is the end term, I have still 1 more year, we have increased the budget of IMPJ by 50%. And this is during tough times. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. Some of our budget today, from a 27 million shekel a year budget, 2 million shekels come directly from the Israeli government. So one can complain until, we can complain a lot about the Israeli government for some very good reasons. But we are working also together with them and knowing how to do these things, understanding how it works. And Danny made reference to that, you know, about him and Leah sitting at the national institutions. One of the easiest things to say about the national institutions, Andrew was there as well, is one of those things, well, you know, they are complicated organizations. Who wants to deal with them? But it's a mistake. This is the place where we are around the table. We can do that, and we make a difference. And actually, we make a difference mostly with our young adults. They are very, very effective because everybody, even if he doesn't agree with the reform movement, and he will not listen to Rabbi Rick Jacobs or Rabbi Daniel Freelander, they will listen to our young adults because our young adults will not let them not listen to them.
Fair.
They are starting to speak, as I say, I told that to Rick and I told that to Danny many, many times. You need to start speaking Hebrew. Also, when you speak English, you have to speak Hebrew culturally, because speak Israeli, because this is the only way people understand. What can you do? That's the way the culture works. And sometimes you have to raise a voice. So what?
It goes back to, it's not just how things have always been done. It's you've got to change with the times, and you've got to make that happen. So I think my last question, and then we can open it up and have a bit more of a discussion, but is, where do you think the future of progressive Judaism, particularly in Israel, but just in general, do you think it's with the lay leaders, or do you think it's with the professionals, or do you, like, what is your vision?
At this size, it's a combination. It cannot work without lay leaders, and I don't think it can work without a very, very strong professional team. Anna and I went through an interesting experience. 2 years ago, we recruited a new manager for our youth movement. And there were like 3 candidates. One we came up to the conclusion wasn't a good fit at all, so that was put aside. And we had one candidate who was very, very good, and we had one position. But Anat, who came in second best into that, was a very, very good person. I mean, it's like, you know, she was not as qualified at that point in time as Nadav, but was a very good person. And Anna and I had a discussion between a lay leader and a professional. What do we do? And we said, look, this is a very good person. We need to find the budget. We have to hire her, give her a good position. Now, it's also paid off. We found a solution. It paid off because now Nadav is going to his next job, and that's going to be in the U.S., and we need somebody who is qualified, and we don't need to look outside. We have somebody already in the movement. She knows the job. She's now, 2 years later, absolutely qualified to do that. And it's, again, thinking outside of the box, because if you look just at the budget, we shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have done that. And that requires this kind of flexibility, both on the professional side and the lay leadership, to always look at things and opportunities, and when they are there, don't say 2 years later, oh, why didn't we do that? Because there's nothing you can change about what has not happened.
Right.
So we do.
Yeah, you've got to invest now for what the outcome later sometime.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we have a roving mic, so I might just repeat questions unless you know where it is. Do you want to? Yeah, this one's plugged in, so that one.
Oh, this one's the mic.
I'll take that one.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, have you got it?
Hi, my name is Igor Zinkov, a rabbinical student. Very often I hear when it comes to the discussion about Israel, very often I hear that you have to speak either Hebrew or English when you're in Israel. But actually, there is a third language which you have to speak when you're in Israel, which is Russian. At least 20% of Israelis have some kind of a strong connection to Russian-speaking culture. And my first question is, do you think about it? I mean, there is one rabbi now, one Russian-speaking rabbi, and one student in the HUC in Jerusalem who speaks Russian. But do you think that it's enough just to work with Russian-speaking Israelis? And the second question is, from a different perspective, there are lots of Israelis living, at least I think I heard about 1 million, but it may be wrong. I didn't check the statistics. Do you think that, for example, British rabbis or British Jewry are doing good enough job to work with Israelis living in the UK, or American rabbis, American movement, doing good enough job to work with Israelis living in the States?
So first I must admit ignorance about what happens here in the UK about rabbis working with Israelis in the community. I don't know, so I'll not comment on that. I think in the US it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that comes from an issue that Israelis are not used to be affiliated with a synagogue. So it is a very difficult issue that it requires adjustments, also cultural adjustments also on the other, because in the tendency in the US synagogues is if you don't pay your dues, you cannot be a member. This is not the right way to be, as the movement there calls it, audacious hospitality. It doesn't work very well because, again, the people don't understand. It's not a matter of not necessarily wanting. They just don't understand that concept of why you need to pay dues to a synagogue, where in Israel, they don't need to do that. Okay? So it's one of the things that needs to be done. It's a learning experience. You also asked about Russian communities. So we do have 3 Russian-speaking communities now in Israel. What about there's one in Afula? Shirat Hayam.
Shirat Hayam, Shirat Hagan, Shirat HaBe'er.
Shirat HaBe'er. And what is about Shirat HaEmek? That's news. That's news in Afula. Yes. And they approach us. So it's happening. I'm not sure about the speaking of Russian per se. It's like, we don't speak English in our communities in Israel today. It's really, maybe with the exception of the Herzliya, the one in Herzliya who still find it difficult. But if you look at the second generation, or what they call also generation and a half in Israel, they all speak Hebrew fluently. They usually, once they go and serve in the military service, that kills the Hebrew issue immediately because they have to know some Hebrew so as not to kill their comrades. So, that works. And so I think that is not necessarily the problem of the language. The problem, I think, is a problem of culture and gapping that. And there we have a much bigger challenge, not with necessarily the Russians in that respect, but with Sephardic Jews, with what we call the traditional Jew. And again, it's something that we don't find, and we cannot really have enough experience in the reform movement outside of Israel. Okay? This is a really unique issue that comes in Israel because of the size and so on. Yes, Anna? You.
Yeah, I just want to... Oh, okay. So I'm Anna Kislansky. I'm the COO of the Israeli Reform Movement. And I just want to elaborate a little bit about our work with the Russian-speaking communities and in general, I think, expats living in Israel. From France, from the U.S., and Reuven also referred to the fact that we actually have an English-speaking community in Herzliya Pituach after really seeing that most of our communities have mostly Sabras, and some of them really struggle with their English. So with the Russian-speaking communities, it is truly not necessarily about the language, but about the culture and the fact that they call themselves in Hebrew Dor Echad V'Chetzi, generation 1.5. Meaning we understand the Hebrew, we grew up in Israel, but we identify as Russian Jews, so please work with us. And therefore, rabbis like Grisha Kotler and Benny Minich, who is a student rabbi, really know how to work with that community. And we realized that after trying to, for many years, reach out to the Russian speaker Olim to join our communities, and we were not successful. We started being successful by creating separate communities. I'm just returning from France, where I've had conversations with the French-speaking communities talking about the fact that you have French Israelis now who made Aliyah and live in their bubbles. Some of them have connection to their progressive communities. They come from progressive communities in Paris. And so they're asking us to do something with them, French-speaking minyanim. God forbid they would go to Biennial or any other of our congregations because they want to be treated, they want to be spoken to in their language, which is not just the French language, but the French Jewish culture. So we're really trying to be creative in that sense. And one of our ideas is actually to map out the French expats in our communities so that we can reach out to them. It's a lot of work. And then
I just want to pick up on something. I think one of the things that we spoke about previously was about listening to the people that you have and not making assumptions because you think you understand them. And I think that happens a lot, especially with young people. And like you were saying about kind of making sure that people listen to you, that it's very easy for people to say, when I was that age, or this is what I think they want, or this is what I think I understand about what they want. And I can understand in that situation, it's very easy to think they want to maybe engage with their local community and they want to build that and they want to be part of it. But actually, lots of people want to keep hold of what they've got. And I think not making those assumptions, but actually taking the time to reach out and understand what it is that people want, whether it's, you know, programming or communities or like we were talking about previously and like Danny was talking about in terms of using your resources and how you're using them and the best way to use them and not just thinking about the most complicated solution, but maybe there's a very simple solution that the people you're dealing with and you're working with can tell you. You just need to listen to it. Yeah.
One of the things also, you know, and again, because of the Sephardic Jews, you'll see now in New Siddur, you'll see already impacts from the Sephardic Siddur going into our Siddur. Just, you know, if you look at the Kaddish, it has a whole section which is very, very different. But both appear now side by side, which was not part of the Reform Siddur until now, but it's becoming an issue. You'll hear all kinds of tunes when they chant from the Torah. You can, you know, in my congregation, you'll have at least 3 or 4. In Beit Daniel, they have 6 or 7 different ways of chanting from the Torah, including a Yemenite who reads and you will not necessarily even understand always the way he pronounces Hebrew, because he pronounces it in a different way than what you're used to listening to what we don't speak today, the Sephardic Hebrew. So we need to address all of that. You know, looking at the texts, Israel has a lot of new texts. As I said, it doesn't finish with Shlonsky and Alterman and Bialik and Leah Goldberg. There's a wealth of new texts that we are going to include in the new Siddur, and it is very, very important because again, it includes more people who connect better to these kinds of texts.
I'd love if you could bring this conversation back to the topic of the session around lay leadership and thinking about how do you build a board or a lay team that is reflective of the diversity of the movement? I mean, it's one thing to program for a number of different populations, and understanding those populations are important. It's almost an entirely different issue to involve them in professional, but specifically for this session, lay leadership. And I'm curious what your philosophy is around that.
One is something that has to be done, and it's part of the responsibility of the chair, vice chair, to go and identify people as we go along. I have, you know, my colleague here, Anna, is very helpful in that, because when we talk about these things, we need to always find people in the various congregations who are capable and willing to do this kind of job. Some of it is an issue of accessibility. They need to understand the information. And we're getting better and better. We have now a weekly newsletter that goes out. So we are connecting more and more to our congregants, and it's made easy because of technology. You can get there. It doesn't assure that people read what you send. It just assures that they receive email, and you know, it could be like junk mail that you receive, you know, everywhere. And people may or may not read it. And it's still a challenge to have people, you know, read the information. People do not have a lot of time to read information. So some of it is engagement with people, giving them the opportunity and challenging them. Sometimes we are afraid to challenge people. We will not tell them, when they come and critique work that we do, we start apologizing. Well, you know, we could do this, there's a budget constraint, and so on and so forth. Some of the things I think I have learned, you know, over the time is to tell them, it's a very good opinion. What committee do you want to join? What management committee, board committee do you want to join? Now, probably 95% will not have time, or will tell you that they do not have time to do that. And that's okay, because those people who do not have time to do that, while they do have a lot of time, they will never produce the work. They'll just produce a lot of your time to do that. So one of the secrets is to find those people who have no time. Those people who have no time will always find time to spare and do good things. I don't know how they do that, but this is the way things work. Find people who are very, very busy, challenge them with something that is interesting, and they'll be there. They usually will come and do things.
I think as someone who is that very, very busy person, that is definitely true, and I don't know how it happens, but it happens. I think from my perspective, I think a lot of it, especially with lay leadership, is being very open in the opportunities and how to access those opportunities and who you're looking for. I think many people don't understand that the opportunity is even there, and if it is, they have no idea how to get there or what you need to be there. So I think, for example, before I became a trustee at Limud, I had no idea that was kind of even an option for the next step until they came to me and explained why and why it made sense to them. And I think a lot of lay leadership has that problem, that unless someone knows you and comes to you and says, we think you're good at this, we think you should do more of it and you should do it with us, almost no one thinks of that themselves. And I think especially when you're looking at people who are not represented, it's primarily because they just don't know it's available and they don't know that you're actually looking for them. And I think sometimes you have to be very blunt about it, and it's about, putting it in your newsletter and saying, we are looking for, young people or people who are not represented on our board of X, Y, and Z, whatever that might be. But sometimes it's about reaching out to those people who you think would be great, and they just need to be challenged and they need to be given that opportunity and say, you might be doubting yourself, but we don't doubt you. And sometimes it's about having someone else believe in you and push you up there and into that position for you to do it, because otherwise you're not going to do it yourself. And a lot of the time, I think, especially with those that are unrepresented, if you ask them when they finally get there, it's only been delayed because they had no idea how to get there. So sometimes it's just telling people and explaining what it means and that you want them there in the first place.
I'm Toby from South Bucks Jewish Community. How did you increase the income for the Israeli movement for Reform Judaism by 50%? Did you shake the magic money tree?
Well, I have one growing somewhere, but this is a secret thing. No, but I think one of them is challenging my professional staff in telling them what I see as my vision for how much money we need year to year. Now, the good thing about a very, very good team is that they are capable of doing things. They're capable of executing things. You can challenge them, and then they'll go and find solutions to the problem. Now, you have to be very careful not to put something that is unachievable. Going back to the Little Prince, there's that scene there where he goes and visits a king, and the king on one of the planets, he tells the sun to rise, and the sun rises, and he tells the sun to set, and it sets, and the moon comes up. And the Little Prince tells him, it does it anyway. I mean, there's nothing to it. So he says, yes, but if I would say something else, they wouldn't do that. And there's a learning in that, when you come and give a challenge, and rising and setting is a challenge in a sense, you have to put the right things. So we do that, and we do that. It's not that just imposing things. It's a lot of discussion and debate. But then we do that. Because we always need more funds. I mean, even at that levels, with these funds, there are funds missing. But once it's there, everybody knows, okay, we need to work towards this happening. Then they make it happen. They are good at it. And then the professionals can come to me and say, well, Reuven, I need you to go and speak to X, Y, Z and do this. I need you to be at the Knesset. I need you to be there. And they know how to do that stuff. That's their forte. And it's not, I don't go to Jerusalem, not even every week. I don't live in Jerusalem. And Anna, unfortunately, has to be, we have to coordinate because I hate driving. So I don't, not that much, but, driving in Israel in the morning. So we kind of make an appointment somewhere on Highway 4, and Anna picks me up, and we together curse all the other drivers who are driving too slow all the way to Jerusalem, from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock, and we are on the road, but we also do a lot of work together. So I do that maybe every other week, maybe once in 3 weeks. I don't get there very often, because one of the things you have to be also very careful as a lay leader is not to become a micromanager. And this is also a problem that I've seen with lay leadership, is the tendency, I need to know everything, I need to approve everything, I need to know every cent where it goes because that's my responsibility. If that's what you want, don't be a lay leader. Don't be a lay leader because it's unhealthy, the organization cannot develop, it's not going to get anywhere. People need to know that they have the ability to make decisions, trust them, and I'll take the responsibility. I'm not afraid of taking the responsibility if they fail. I'm not afraid of that. It can happen. And sometimes, we were sitting in Prague, at the Biennial, the European Biennial, at the World Union meeting on Friday, what was it, Friday? Thursday? On Thursday, and suddenly my phone starts to rattle, and I look at it, and you learn about what has happened there with one of the machinot, one of the three army seminars. The youngsters were 18, 19-year-olds were killed, and I know that our own mechina, where the kids were going into, they had a week in Judea and Samaria, so immediately, you can make the connection, Judea and Samaria, somebody shot there, who knows what has happened? But because we didn't have the information, it took time for us to get to our friend Shinko, who runs and understand that everybody is accounted for. There was nothing there. It was just a careless outing in one of the wadis that got flooded and 10 kids got killed. And it happens, these things can happen. You can be highly responsible for something that somebody has done which is utterly stupid. And it can happen. You have to be able to live with these kinds of things and these kinds of consequences as the lay leader and still let people do what they need to do. Now, it doesn't mean that immediately after that, we did not start executing a whole plan of checking our own safety procedures. We had nothing to do. We were with no problem. But our assumption, Anna, Gilad, myself, other leaders, Leslie Sachs, who is the chair of the Mechina, immediately thinking, okay, where are we at fault? What are we not doing well enough to make sure that the kids, when they go out, they have all these programs, what can we correct in what we do? We know that we are not better than the others. We have to become better. And it's part of the leadership. So,
I think I was just going to add to that, I think partly from what you just said, but also in terms of the question of how do you get those funds. I think it's about learning from each other. I think no one does everything perfectly and no one does everything badly. And I think especially in the non-profit charity organizational world, it's very easy to be scared of that corporate kind of more efficient world, and this world that a lot of us don't understand often, and see it as something that doesn't really work for us. And actually, I think learning from them and learning those skills about whether it's really pushing yourselves and challenging yourselves and being really strategic about where you're going and what you want to get out of it, and using those skills and the people you have, and actually harnessing every single skill that you have in front of you in the way that a company would, because otherwise why are they hiring you, is something that is very hard for a lot of small startups, organizations that are not businesses, to really do and not feel like they're stepping on people's toes or taking advantage of those skills in that time. And actually, a lot of the time, you've got to give people the opportunity to provide those skills for you, and they're more than willing to do it. But often, it's that fear of asking the question and asking them to be in that position. And I think actually learning from those organizations and those companies that we don't see as equivalent teaches us a lot. And I think just like we can learn a lot in the UK and liberal movement from IMPJ and from what you are doing and the growth that you have in your communities, I think there's also lots of things I'm sure that Israel looks at us for, and the same thing in terms of WPJ and EPJ. We all learn from each other because everyone has different experiences and different focuses and strategic focuses, and therefore, when we are moving on to another strategy, we're going to look to other people and see how we can learn from them, because there's no point reinventing the wheel if you don't have to. But there's also no point thinking that just because someone else has done it differently that it doesn't work for you.
Well, one interesting point, to go back to the money stuff, is, for example, another thing that was never done before, and that was the support of Kakal, the JNF, supporting the biennial, the URJ biennial, and giving it, what's it called? Hasut. What's Hasut in English? Sponsorship. Suddenly forgot the word. A sponsorship, a major sponsorship, and that was it was first for Kakal and first for us to do it. But if you don't ask and you don't go and run the corridors, it will surely you got to know as a as an answer. So we did it the first time, and we hope to do it more. It's a ways of raising funds. We shouldn't be shy of that. Yes.
Reuven, one of the interesting phenomena for us as a community in the UK is that some of our best lay leaders are people who have chosen to become Jewish. And that is something within a number of our communities around the country. This may be not a phenomenon at all, but what's the position with conversion in Israel? And knowing that Judaism has always embraced a rich tapestry of peoples, does the IMPJ see any role for people who, or reach out to people who might like to become Jewish as well?
I would suggest that when you have an opportunity, go on Facebook and look for the Netanya congregation, because Rabbi Edgar Noff puts always pictures, and when you look at the pictures, I think you'll get a good answer for your question, which is interesting. And I think it's a very good question. Yes, we see ourselves as forefront runners in the issue of conversion, especially those conversions that the Rabbanut in Israel, tend to shy away or kind of push away, or whatever you like to call it. But yes, and we do a lot of conversions. Our Beit Din, I think, every week has conversions. No, it's busy all the time. I know that our congregation, Edgar Noff, does many of them. How many did we convert last year? Do you remember the number?
I think around 150.
Something like that.
I mean, it's big in Israeli terms for our movement. It's relatively big numbers. And I also want to say that what you've mentioned is no exception. Once you invite people in, and through the convergence process, they become our most committed members, and you can see it in mostly the large convergence classes. You can see it in Biennial, and you can see it in Hadash, and also in Netanya. And another interesting fact, we were talking about Sephardi Jews. So sometimes how our movement changes is really getting in Sephardi Jews. Some of them are actually, were married to someone who went through a conversion in our community. So they suddenly find themselves, chanting in a Yemenite style, or, becoming part of a synagogue where they already gave up on it when they chose to marry someone who was not born Jewish. So I think there are a lot of similarities in this.
I think one of the things one needs to understand, because we always hear about the difficulties in Israel and the challenges and so on and so on. The Israeli movement and the reform movement and conservative movement, but the reform movement more so than the conservative, because they are stuck somewhere in the middle, and it's not an easy place to be, is very successful. We are changing the way people talk about Judaism in Israel. We force them to go and talk about that. So it is, you see more and more women, even Haredi women, and so they want, to be in synagogues. They want to read from the Torah. They want to go and go to the Beit Din and or be the manager of the court, the rabbinical court. So you see that change, and all of this change, if you go and trace it, it comes down to our movements. That is where it happens. So they're delayed, sometimes 50 years, sometimes 100 years. But they're getting it. They are getting the message. They are going to change. It's not going to, Danny talked about that. It's not going to be, 20 and 30 years now, it's not going to look the same. When I look at it, when I joined the reform movement, when I talk about the reform congregations, kids, I was a teenager, nobody knew what I was talking about. It was like, who knows? There's a synagogue near me, and I don't know anything about it. At best, they knew it started in Germany, and then all the bad stuff that the Israelis talk about. But that was today. It's not most secular Jews in Israel identify with the reform movement. We find that about 500,000 Israelis identify themselves as Reform Jews. Now, most of the 500,000 don't go to our synagogue because we wouldn't have even a space to accommodate them. No matter how much of the audacious hospitality we would try to do, they would just not fit in. but they come. Interesting also is that more and more of them see Jewish events, Jewish life cycle events in the Reform movement. And it is not only that the secular Jews, 10% of Haredi Jews have participated in what they identify as Reform, and could be conservative, they don't necessarily know. The tag name Reform is very strong in Israel, more than conservative, and so they'll know this is not Orthodox, so this is Reform. So, they've been there, they've seen, and the more people see, the less they are afraid of that interaction. And that is, I think, what is happening. One has to keep that in mind.
I just wanted to pick up on something that Aaron, from that discussion, that I think, in terms of the lay leadership, and going back to what Andrew was saying, in terms of, there's something really interesting about the people that we have, especially in the UK, as lay leaders, are those who have a lot of engagement with their communities. So whether they are people who've chosen to be Jewish and they've gone through that program and they've had a lot of engagement with their rabbis and their community and their fellow congregants, or they grew up in the youth movement and they've had that engagement from the beginning and from a young age. And I think it's about transitioning from people having that transactional experience of synagogue, of I show up on Saturday, I go to the service, I leave, and that's it, and that's my experience of liberal Judaism, to kind of engaging those people and giving them a meaning and like a connection to it to make them want to build that relationship and engage and provide with it. And I think people who have that are more than willing to take on those leadership roles and those lay leadership roles, and they want to contribute and they want to give back in a sense. And I think sometimes it's about finding a way of those people who maybe don't have that obvious engagement route, finding a way to do that in a way that provides them with that understanding and relationship with their community, both their congregation but also the wider movement. Yeah.
So I want to kind of follow on really from what both of you were saying, which is thinking about previous biennials and other conferences, is that both when we talk about Israel and perhaps when we put on any session on any track, whether or not we highlight our lay leadership according to their skills. So often the tendency is to see our rabbis, and obviously they're very important and charismatic and generally wonderful, but it's very rare that you'll see a stage, I think, in this format of promoting our lay leadership and the skills that they can teach. And I wondered whether, from either of you, both of you, whether you think that's a fair reflection and whether we should be doing more of that. And also in terms of the Israel piece, whether we tend to focus so much on the conflict. And as important as that is, and as much as we know that our congregants want to engage with it, whether there is more that we could learn from each other in terms of on the lay leadership, because actually that's where there is that potential for relation, and that it strikes me hearing Reuven talk how similar, and this is what really I think why you're here, because of the conversation we began about how similar liberal Judaism is to IMPJ, not in terms of the money, for sure, although we'd like to be. But certainly in terms of the demographics of our communities, the work that we're trying to do, where you're at. I think discussion today has been really fascinating for me.
I think my first, just to pick up on your first part of the question, I think it's an interesting one that I think is happening in lots of different spaces, about the idea of like who is the face of your organization, and I think it goes back to what we were saying about that relationship and those boundaries of understanding why they're there and what they can provide. And I think a lot of it is, as we said, understanding their skills and their knowledge and being able to use that to the best of their ability, and not just thinking of them as a board member who happens to have an interest, but actually taking an interest in them and making that a reciprocal relationship to understand what they can provide for you and vice versa. And I think there is definitely a move towards putting more lay leaders out front, and I think that is a good thing, because I think, as Andrew said, like, you have to show that representation to get more of that representation. And I think, yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I also think, again, I think it's about learning from lots of different people, and whether it's Israel, and like, I think sometimes it's very easy to think of like America or Israel as being too different to learn from, and actually, like I said, in my opinion, you can learn from everyone. So.
It is, I think, it's a mixed answer, because it really depends. It depends what you need. What are your targets? When I had a long discussion with Gilad, our Rabbi Gilad Kariv, our CEO and president, about that, the conclusion was that it would be best to have a few select spokespersons who can consistently go and be available to be television, on radio, and that they go through the same, the messages, they have them all down, very, very accurate, and they know how to play the media very, very well. And I think it was a good decision, because when I look at the results of IMPJ in Israeli media has gone up significantly. I mean, now there's rarely a week where we are not mentioned. And if you look, even 5 or 6, 7 years ago, this was not the case. People are seeking our spokespeople. Now, what happens is if you have all kinds of people speaking, it makes it very difficult. The message gets kind of inconsistent, and it's not a good play to do. But that is going externally. Internally, we try to balance that. So, for example, when we had recently our Veida, our biennial, so it is a balance between lay leadership and the professionals. So Gilad speaks in one session, I speak in another session, and just, we try to build some balance there so that people see both the lay leadership and the professionals. And we have also our biennial goes Friday and Saturday. Friday night, late at night, 11 o'clock at night, we have a bar meeting with the lay leadership. So everybody can meet our board, raise issues, have a discussion, have a debate on issues that are interesting to everybody. And this year we had it in parallel. We had an international track and a Hebrew-speaking track. So I had to go and jump from one to the other. So I heard the questions and gave the answers. I spent half of the time in one place and then another half the time in the other session. And Yair, who did the other way around, so my vice chair took the other way. So, and then we got to listen, to what people had to say and the questions, and also some good ideas come up. One of the ideas that came up in that kind of interaction with people was we have for young adults, which we call, after military service all the way to 35, it's a group called Tlamim. And we have several of those, but one of the young adults talked about that age, 18 to 21, 22, 23, where they are in the military service and they do not have a group. And we came up with, our understanding is that we need to come up with a Tlamim IDF kind of thing, where they can connect together with activities that fit young adults who are still in their military training or service, and they have different ways of looking at issues and things that they want to do. That's one thing. You also asked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think we are spending too much time debating that internally. With all due respect, it's a very, very complicated conflict. One has to realize that. And again, I say I try to speak the truth as I see it. I mean, it's not. It has nothing to do with my political, what I would prefer politically to happen. It's just looking, first of all, what are the facts and how are we going to be impactful on the facts, and making all kinds of statements and writing, all kinds of papers on it. It's all very nice and it's good, but it's very, very little impact. But it has a very, very long memory. And then they always pick on you on something that you predicted and didn't happen, and you see, you said that, and this didn't happen the way you said it would be. Okay, so what have we done? We want to change certain things in the lives of people. Let's concentrate on doing them. There are much more effective ways of doing them than making statements on things that really do not change the world, but just create aggravation. And there, we are working now very, very closely with the URJ leadership, with the CCAR leadership, and the HUC leadership, because a lot of damage has been done in the last few months, making statements like that haunt only the Israeli movement. They don't impact really people outside of Israel, but they do have an adverse impact on Israel. And it's not to say one shouldn't talk. It's absolutely okay to talk, but it should be coordinated and really well understood, because the issue is complicated. The other thing to say, where there was a statement of CCR about what's going on in Gaza. What they forget is that as my children are there, as soldiers, on the line, it is my brothers and sisters who are there on the line, sometimes our parents. They forget it. It's not a theoretical debate on an issue. It's a very, very practical thing, and with all due respect to rabbis coming from abroad, they do not understand issues of security. They must realize that. They have an issue, they understand morality very well, but not necessarily issues of security. That even, a lieutenant like myself understands better. And I wouldn't consider myself a very, astute or very learned military advisor. It's not the case. These are complicated issues. And if we want one day to listen more about that, Yair Lutzstein is who is a colonel in the military, specialized in exactly this area. And he has fascinating speeches about what it requires in the IDF to make some decisions that people just look at them and say, well, somebody shot somebody. It doesn't work that way. It's interesting, but I think it's beyond the scope for here, but I think it's also a good point to make.
So that's the end of the session. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Reuven. I think this session and the questions just show how nebulous kind of lay leadership can be, and whether it's relationships between the lay leaders and the professionals, whether it's about diversity and representation, about what we do, how we do it, and finances and everything in between. So thank you very much. Reuven is around, so if you have any other questions, he will be around. Thank you.